Here's what's coming up on the world today. Autopsy report reveals student was shot in the back by live round in Senegal riots. Former U.S. President Donald Trump faces second indictment over leaked classified documents. Plus, Saudi Arabia, U.S. announced 24-hour Sudan ceasefire from Saturday. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Susan Ilian. An autopsy report reveals that a student who died in Senegal's capital, Dakar, on June the 2nd during clashes between security forces and protesters was killed by a live round in his back. 26-year-old Alhaji Sis was shot yards from his home in a suburb of Dakar in the evening as he returned from praying at a nearby mosque. Hundreds attended his funeral in Dakar's Grand Yoff neighborhood this week and later at a cemetery by the ocean, where Sis was laid to rest, covered in a shroud. The autopsy results, which have not been previously reported, says Sis was shot in the back and that the bullet punctured his right lung before exiting around his upper arm. Meanwhile, rights group Amnesty International was called on Senegalese authorities to carry out independent investigations into the deadly violence during protests last week, saying at least 23 people died. This death toll by Amnesty is higher than the official number of 16 announced by the government. According to the rights group, 3 children are among the 23 killed. They are now calling on the authorities to carry out a credible, independent and impartial investigation into the circumstances of these deaths and to assure that those responsible for unlawful killings are prosecuted according to fair trial standards. Senegal's government had earlier said it had launched an inquiry into the protest deaths and has not responded to Amnesty's statement. In the meantime, the country is recovering from the worst unrest the country has seen in decades.
Senegal is taking stock of the damage done after the jail sentencing of prominent opposition figure Ousmane Sonko. The jailing of Sonko led to 3 days of protests which saw infrastructure damaged and public transport torched. The partly state-funded bus company Demdik was a common target during the protests, with more than 70 buses torched and around 20 smashed with rocks. Ousmane Silla is a chief executive of Demdik. He says the riot cost the company a lot of money.
In the protest of the past week, we have seen an upsurge of major significance and losses. We estimate the buses that were stoned, looted, and burned amount to the equivalent of more than $5.75 million in losses for Dakar.
Silla said it will take around 15 consecutive days of calm for the company to bounce back fully. Stalled operations can cost Demdik up to $80,000 in losses per day and make it difficult for thousands of commuters to get to work. Ndiaye Cissé buys goods in Senegal's capital, Dakar.
If these buses are destroyed, we will feel it. This is a means of transportation that is at our doorstep and allows us to move around without difficulty. It is harder for us, the workers. When you burn what belongs to everyone, it's not the state that will feel it, but your fellow citizens.
The government estimates the unrest could slow economic output by an equivalent of around $33 million per day. More than a dozen were killed and hundreds injured when security forces clashed with protesters. Sonko's supporters saw his conviction as a political attempt to stop him from running for president next year, but the government denies this. Sonko was first detained for alleged rape 2 years ago, which led to the start of an ongoing legal battle.
Security expert David Otto joins me now from London. Hi, David. Now, what do you make of the clashes and the riots in Senegal at the moment?
Well, it's quite disturbing. What we know so far is that protesters have accused the government of politically motivated conviction of the what a lot of analysts have termed as the #1 rival for the upcoming 2024 general elections and presidential elections, Ousmane Sonko. He was convicted and sentenced to a 2 years imprisonment, by a Dakar court, accused of corrupting the youth. But he was cleared of one of the main charges, which was rape. But what a lot of the protesters are saying is that Ousmane Sonko has been targeted, because of course previous politicians have also been targeted by the government to prevent them from running. But the most important aspect, which I think a lot of the protesters have talked about, is the fact that the Senegalese president Macky Sall has not declared if he's going to run or he's not going to run for a third term. But a lot of the protesters fear that he's trying to run for a third term, which is going to be kind of a constitutional coup. So, what we've seen, so far is a reaction and a peaceful protest, which has turned really bad because, of course, the law enforcement agencies have reacted, and a lot of people have been killed as a result of that.
Indeed, it's quite unfortunate. And David, it seems as though supporters of Sonko are not backing out. Are we about to see an even more bloody battle?
Yes, they're not backing out. And this is why I think it's important for the Senegalese authorities, especially the president, to come to some kind of, agreement. But of course, the difficulty is that, the Dakar courts, at this point in time, they do not want to overturn this conviction. So it's going to be very difficult for some kind of an agreement to be taken. But what I think would help in this instance is if the president makes it very clear that he will either stand or not stand for the upcoming election. But this is much more of a severe crisis which is affecting the entire. Which might affect the entire West Africa. We've seen a lot of coups d'etats, which have, come at the backdrop of, what I term constitutional coups. I mean, that is when leaders decide to run for a third term, when in fact the constitution, clearly states that, you can only do 2 terms. So I think, the government needs to be very clear that one, it will not run again, the president, he will not run again for the third term, and, try as much as possible to convince the population that the conviction of the political rival, Ousmane Sonko, is not politically motivated.
Very interesting. And the fallout from the crisis has really echoed abroad, David, with people, Senegalese people from the diaspora, leading demonstrations outside of consulates in their respective countries overseas. Now, it seems that Sonko has that much influence. Do you think that, as a result of that, this sentencing is actually a strategy?
Yes, a lot of Senegalese have made it very clear that this particular sentencing is it's kind of politically motivated, because of course Ousmane Sonko is has been. A lot of political analysts see him as the most powerful rival. He came third in the last 2019 elections. So I think it's a bit of a concern for a lot of people who believe that he's been targeted because of course he presents a very strong opposition to the government. But we're still yet to determine whether he's going to run. Because if he goes to prison, then that automatically disqualifies him to become a candidate next year.
All right. Well, then with this whole economic turmoil, what's the future of Senegal's presidential elections next year? What can we expect?
It's going to be quite tough. One needs to first of all see if President Macky Sall decides to run again. If he does, then that would lead to more protest. Senegal has been a beacon of democracy, and we do not want any instability in the ECOWAS region anymore. We already have very difficult situations in countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, and the justice system, has demonstrated that it does not have the impartiality that is required for a democratic process. But, very tough days ahead for Senegalese.
All right. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
That was security expert David Otto from London. Now, away from Senegal, mediators in Saudi Arabia and the United Nations say Sudan's warring sides have agreed to a nationwide ceasefire for 24 hours, starting early on Saturday, June 10. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry said in a Twitter post that the ceasefire will begin at 6 a.m. local time. The agreement marks the latest in several failed attempts to stop weeks of fighting between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces parliamentary group. The ministry's statement said the two sides agreed, as they had done in previous abortive ceasefires, to refrain from seeking military advantage during the 24-hour period, and also added prohibited movements, attacks, use of aircraft or drones, aerial bombardment, artillery strikes, reinforcement of positions, and resupply of forces. South African prosecutors have significantly increased the number of charges they are bringing against former Rwandan police officer Fulgence Kayishema, who is wanted internationally for participating in the 1994 Rwandan Genocide. He is now facing 54 separate charges related to fraud and immigration in South Africa, up from 5 previously. Kayishema, who is one of Rwanda's most wanted remaining genocide suspects, is accused of ordering the death of 2,000 people hiding in a church. He was on the run for 2 decades before being arrested last month on a grape farm outside of Cape Town, where he was living under a false name. South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, alleges that Kayishema used a false identity in order to apply for asylum and refugee status in South Africa. The case has been postponed to June 20 for Kayishema's defense team to consult, at which point he could apply for bail. He is also expected to face extradition to Rwanda to be tried for crimes there, but those proceedings have not yet started.
And now we've got 54 charges. That 54 includes 9 counts of fraud, 10 counts of the contravention of the Refugees Act, and 35 counts of the contravention of the Immigration Act.
We're now in the United States, where a freight train rammed into a semi-trailer truck stuck on the tracks at a railway crossing in the North Carolina town of Wingate. It's the 3rd such collision at the same crossing this year. Video captured by an eyewitness shows the train plowing through the truck's trailer, smashing it to pieces and continuing on. According to authorities, no one was injured in the incident, and the truck involved was transporting bricks and no hazardous material. But in a surprising turn of events, the driver, Pratchett Rainey, was taken into custody by police after they discovered drugs in the truck's cab. In January, 2 trucks met a similar fate at the same crossing within a week. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been told to show up at federal court next Tuesday in Miami as he faces a 2nd indictment, this time over his handling of classified materials after he left the White House. And this marks the first time in American history a former president has been indicted on federal charges, adding to his legal troubles as he runs for president again. The indictment remains under seal. Sources say Trump faces at least 7 criminal counts in the federal case. However, Trump's lawyer, Jim Trusty, said the charges include conspiracy and obstruction of justice, among others, and that he expects to see the charging document by Tuesday when Trump goes to court. Germany's far-right political party, the AfD, has seen a strong rise in support recently, according to several opinion polls, and is now hitting close to 20% support. The party has previously seen its support rise before falling. Many are wondering if it will last this time. Let's bring in Arthur Sullivan from Deutsche Welle in Berlin with more details now. Arthur, What's behind this rise in support for the AFD?
So yes, the AFD has seen a clear rise in support over the past year, and particularly in the last few months. The last few opinion polls put the party at close to 20% nationally and at around 30% in several states in eastern Germany. Now, if we look at the last general election in 2021, the AFD polled around 10%, which was a drop from the all-time high of 12.6% they got in 2017. So what has changed since this election in 2021? Well, quite a few things, obviously. So we had the after effects and the supply shocks of the pandemic that drove inflation, cost of living crisis, and then that was compounded dramatically by the war in Ukraine. Energy prices soared last year, and the AFD has certainly played on all of that. They have also fiercely opposed the German government's support for Ukraine in the war, saying weapons deliveries should not take place and so on. The AFD is also fiercely anti-immigrant, and that has been something they've played on as well, given that Germany has taken in huge numbers of refugees from Ukraine and previously and still from Syria and Afghanistan. So the far right has targeted voter fears on these issues using the long-established playbook of claiming that foreigners are threatening the country's culture and so on. But possibly the biggest reason of all is the fact that the Green Party is now in government in Germany, and the AFD has focused a lot of its attention and their attacks on this party's climate-friendly policies and on the party's individuals more generally. The AFD are climate sceptics and in some cases outright climate change deniers. But many people in Germany, like in many industrialised countries around the world, are worried that the energy transition away from fossil fuels is too expensive and that some of it's happening too fast. So the AFD's attacks are hitting a nerve and helping them gain support. And the final point, the AFD is always strongest in the east of Germany, and they have always been doing quite well there, more so than in national elections. So there is typically a stronger anti-government feeling in the former eastern German states.
All right, interesting to hear that. Now, how real is this support ultimately, given that so far it's mostly opinion polls?
Obvious that the AFD rise in support is real to some extent because the polling has been consistent for quite a while. But it is important to say that the AFD has been here before. In the aftermath of the refugee crisis in the 2015 to 2017 period, the AFD exploited strong anti-immigrant sentiment in Germany, and in 2018 it was at a similar level of close to 20% in the polls. But by the time the elections came around, that had fallen back. And there is also a strong protest element to people expressing support for the AFD. German history with World War II, the Nazis and the Holocaust means the country is very sensitive about the rise of far-right movements. So people sometimes find it shocking that the AFD could be so popular, and therefore expressing support for them in a poll is a form of outrage which the government does tend to pay attention to.
Can the party translate it into political power, and are there upcoming elections to look out for?
Well, the question for the AFD has always been, can it hit the big time? It has had big breakthroughs before. For example, it entered Parliament for the first time in 2017, but it has never gotten enough votes to come close to entering national government, and it is also generally excluded from coalition by other parties, so it really does struggle to get into power. But this current surge is strong, and as I said, in the east of Germany in particular. Now, next year, 3 former East German states will hold state elections, and the AFD leads the polling in them at the moment at around 25% on average. And some polls put the AFD at around 30% in the east as a whole. And given where the AFD is strongest in the east, those elections will tell us a lot about whether this AFD surge is here to stay.
All right, thanks very much. That's Arthur Sullivan, our Deutsche Welle correspondent. The new top United Nations official in Somalia, Catriona Leong, has met with leaders of the country's federal member states. She visited Hirshabelle to discuss a range of issues with its leadership and reaffirmed the world body's support. Mrs. Lang was appointed to her position in May and arrived in Somalia earlier this week. Soon after landing in Mogadishu, she met with Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre.
And it is with great pleasure that I make my first trip outside Mogadishu here in Hirshabelle. President, this is the first of many visits I will do to Hirshabelle, and I'm delighted to be looking forward to a very constructive partnership with you and with your team as we work to achieve your aspiration for a peaceful, prosperous, secure Hirshabelle. In my discussions with the President, we focused in particular on the recent flooding crisis crisis that you are facing, and committed to the full support of the UN countries, programs and agencies to come behind the very good efforts of the government to try and ensure that the immediate needs are met, but just as importantly that we invest in the long-term flood defences and so on to ensure there are sustainable solutions. The President updated me on the very effective campaign against Al-Shabaab, the reclaiming of much of the territory, and we talked about the importance of stabilising those areas, coming in with a whole-of-government holistic approach. And again, the UN is very committed to support in that.
And it's a joyful moment as twins from across Europe attended a get-together in Braunau, Austria. For 3 days, they celebrated their life in pairs in the city that is also known for being the birthplace of former Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler. Twins Chantal and Dominique Burros from France enjoy their time among twins from different countries. This year, organizer Max Straffinger welcomed about 50 people pairs, the majority of whom came from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The first meeting was organized 39 years ago. A rare ruby found in Mozambique, said to be the biggest ruby ever to come to auction, has been sold in New York for a record sum of just under $35 million. The stone, a whopping 55.22 carats, was discovered last year in a mine in Mozambique. Uncut, it was 101 carats. It has been called the Estrela de Fura, meaning Star of Fura in Portuguese. The name refers to the company that mined the stone. Polished rubies of more than 5 carats are extremely rare. Sotheby's, who auctioned the gem, described it as a once-in-a-lifetime jewel. The same auction also saw a record sum achieved for a pink diamond. The 10.5 carat gem from Botswana, described as a fancy purplish pink stone, sold for just under $35 million. And finally on the program, a pair of rubber ducks made a splash in Hong Kong's Victoria Harbour today, part of an art installation dubbed Double Ducks by Dutch artist Florentijn Hoffman, who says he hopes the ducks will bring luck to the city. Stationed near Hong Kong's Central District and Tamar Park, the ducks swam across Victoria Harbour to the delight of dozens of bystanders. Hong Kong-based creative studio All Rights Reserved said the ducks were like the symmetrical Chinese characters, Xi for happiness and Peng for friends. The inflatable yellow ducks, 18 meters high, will sail on the harbor for 2 weeks. They come a decade after Hoffman's rubber duck sculpture drew crowds in the Asian financial hub in 2013.
It has been 10 years ago since we brought it. It was a big success. When All Rights Reserved asked me to bring it again, I hesitated, as mentioned before. But when I thought about the world and the needs we have all after pandemic, etc., I thought, yeah, let's double it. So I brought 2 ducks to bring double luck. Well, the relationship is doubled. It's identical. It's not about gender. It's the same. We are all equal. That's what the work is about. So we are all equal. And also here, as spectators and viewers, we are equal.
And that's it for The World Today. I'm Susan Ilian. Thanks for watching.